right, so welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from today. I want to welcome you to the new KoreChain webinar series. Today we're going to talk about digital securities and secondary markets. My name is Laura Pamatian. I'm the founder of Height Zero Real Estate. I have 20 years in real estate and development. I work with real estate companies, real estate owners, developers to teach and guide them through implementing AI and blockchain into their real estate projects. Today I'm joined by an all-star panel, Dr. Karan Garamella, Chief Scientist and CTO at KoreChain, Shipio, Chief Strategy Officer at Texture, and the exquisite, lovely Sarah Hanks, CEO of CrowdCheck Law. I'm going to allow each of you to maybe give us a little background about yourselves, and then we'll jump in. Sarah, you want to go first?
Okay. Hi, Sarah Hanks. I'm CEO of CrowdCheck and managing partner of CrowdCheck Law. And between the two of them, we provide a wide range of legal diligence, disclosure, and compliance services for all aspects of our online capital formation.
Great, thank you. Ben?
My name is Ben DeShipio. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Texture Capital, and we are one of only a very few broker-dealers in the United States that are able to handle digital assets, and we have an ATS that can handle digital assets as well, so we can take companies from primary issuance all the way through secondary trading.
Great. And Dr. Karan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kiran Garamella, and I'm the Chief Scientist and CTO for KoreChain. And I've been in the financial industry for almost like 3 decades now. And my background is in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and of course, blockchain.
Great, thank you. So I would encourage anyone that's watching that if you would like to ask any questions during our chat, please go ahead and type them into the chat space. Maybe make a note as to who the question is for, because our conversation kind of sometimes flows on. So we'll kind of get started there. We're going to be talking about, like I said, digital securities and secondary markets. So I'm going to kind of just maybe walk us into a scenario. So we'll just kind of jump in. So I'm a real estate investor. I invested in an SEC compliant real estate offering that has been tokenized. I did that because the issuer said I'd have the option to move my money out of that offering maybe after a year rather than the 5 years, which is pretty traditional in the space. I'd be able to do that compliantly under my control, and now it's been a year, and now I want to do something else with my money. So what is secondary market trading? Ben, maybe you want to kick us off on that?
Sure. So, I mean, there are, in the scenario that you suggest, obviously you have some personal options available to you. You can find a buyer on your own. You don't really require a secondary market to do that, but that's not going to provide the kind of liquidity that you want or that most investors want in investments. So you would need a digital asset broker dealer that has an ATS and whoever is the issuer of the security that you hold would have to place that security within the the secondary market, either with Texture Capital or with some of the other players in the US. And then at that point, there are various mechanisms for matching investors with sellers. Once that's done, you can actually exit your investment. It's obviously an illiquid market, and the idea is that the more players that come into secondary trading, the more liquid they become, and the bigger players that we can get involved obviously helps kind of neighboring players, because the more people that are participating in a particular secondary trading market can help the others. So.
Got it. And is this happening today? Is this something that I can do today?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got T0, Securities, North Capital, which are 3 of the 9 or 10 digital asset security brokers in the United States. Those are transacting trades now on a weekly basis. They're still low volume compared to, say, the OTC markets, but it's increasing, and you're starting to get attention of large institutional players like, Goldman Sachs is really starting to take a look at it. But some of the difficulties of it are that from FINRA's perspective, you have to be, in the SEC's perspective, you have to be a separate digital asset broker dealer. You can't, so you can't just take a regular broker dealer and make it a digital asset broker dealer. It has to be its own separate entity. And right now, you really only have, like I said, a few players in the United States.
Got it. And we're talking about, on that note, blockchain technology. What kind of impact can blockchain technology have on secondary market trading? Maybe Dr. Karan, if you want to maybe
yes, certainly. I think the biggest distinction or the requirement for any of this to be successful in secondary market trading with blockchain technology is what kind of special capabilities do blockchains bring to this market that are not already present, elsewhere, right? And the real advantages to all of this is the trust that is built into all of these different transactions. People generally think about the secondary markets, especially in the blockchain space and in the private market space, as if they're all peer-to-peer trading all the time. Well, that's not necessarily true. And so even though there will be intermediaries because it's a regulated environment, how can we make this much more seamless and much more fluid? The type of fluidity that exists in the public markets, but how can we bring all of that without the rest of the baggage, right? And how can we bring that more easily into this? And the other part of the where blockchain really plays an important role, and we see this all the time, is the amount of innovation that can happen in this particular space with different business models out there, various types of assets that are being digital assets that are being traded, and all of the smart contracts, the provisions, and there's a whole ton of innovation happening in this space, right? So that's kind of where I see, blockchain playing a critical role.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. Thank you for that explanation. I'm kind of wondering about regulations, right? Because we're trading securities, and my real estate investment was a securitized. They're tokenized securities. So, what regulations can trade on these secondary markets? Maybe Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, the excuse me, the regulations that apply to the market. So you've got two separate sets that apply to two separate actors in this space. The first set is let's look at Laura herself. Every transaction in securities has to be registered with the SEC or made in compliance with an available exemption. So even though I might go on to the New York Stock Exchange and sell my shares of IBM. I might not know it, but I'm actually relying on the exemption from registration under the Securities Act that's provided by Section 4A1. And that's for anybody who is not the issuer, dealer, or an underwriter of the securities. And so that's the exemption, the so-called resale exemption that is available to the seller. Even though they might not realize they have it, they might not realize they need it, but they also need to comply with state securities laws, even for the secondary transactions. And the states have their own rules, and this is one of the things that reputable ATSs are like, okay, we got that sorted for you. We know which exemptions the sellers can be relying on for trading on our markets. One thing to flag, though, is that in many cases the seller, let's say the seller acquired 30%. I mean, these are illiquid markets. So maybe there was a very sticky deal and somebody bought 30% of the offering, the offering in which you acquired your real estate securities. That person might be deemed to be a so-called underwriter, somebody who is part of the flow of securities from the issuer to the public markets. And that's one reason that reputable ATSs will filter for that kind of thing. So they will filter for, do you own these things? And that's where the blockchain comes in. They filter for, are you allowed to sell these things? And are you allowed to sell under both federal and state law? So that's sales by the seller. And then you've got the other set of regulations, which is part of what Ben talked about, which is the entity bringing together buyers and sellers also regulated. You need to have a broker in the space. And if you are doing automatic matching, that broker has to be an alternative trading system or even an exchange. And if they are digital, then you've got this third requirement, which is not only do you have to be a broker and qualify as an ATS, but are you the right kind of broker? And so you always have to bear in mind that you've got these two separate sets, the seller and the person who's bringing buyers and sellers together.
Yeah, and going back to what kind of impact blockchain can have on the secondary market. I mean, it can really be huge, and it can, we can start with what it can do now, but what it can do in the future is, I mean, there are some limitless opportunities for efficiencies in the future that aren't there right now. But even right now, smart contracts have the opportunity to deliver, efficiencies with regard to compliance and issuer preference and all kinds of rules that get put as part of some of these secondary trading transactions that normally need to be filtered separately and have other parties that are involved. These can all be baked into a smart contract, and that helps the efficiency of that movement and who can participate in that movement and all of that.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ben. But one thing I always say is, I try not to use the term smart contracts because they're not smart and they're not contracts, but they are a system of instructions. And as you say,
Yes.
you can filter for all of these things and bake them in so that compliance is, as a lawyer, I never say assured, but compliance is enhanced for sure.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. And people think, smart contracts are, you can get rid of all the smart people and you can get rid of all the lawyers. No, I don't think that's going to ever happen.
Right.
Sorry.
It doesn't have its own AI, right? Garbage
Yeah,
in,
exactly. And Sarah, you mentioned, right, the blue sky laws, right? The state and blue sky laws. I mean, that's a classic example of somebody, that doesn't have the right systems in place. They might spend a whole lot of time worrying about, how compliant are the transactions, the sell side or the buy side, compared to, you've got the SEC, the FINRA, you've got the blue sky laws, and then you've got all the shareholder agreements or subscription agreements. What do they say about it, right? And how complicated can they be? All of that, exists today. You can do it manually too, right? But the thing is, can you do it fast? Can it be assured and trusted because it's immutable and nobody can tinker with that? I mean, I think that's where the real value is.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's such a. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's all right. And then long term, obviously, future lawmaking and future regulatory decisions made by FINRA and SEC and others can affect, the growth of these efficiencies exponentially. Really, I mean, the future product obviously, hopefully, is a system where transactions can happen instantaneously on blockchain, where money gets transferred, securities get transferred, and you can take out a number of middle players. So both from a money perspective and time perspective and resource perspective, you have so many inefficiencies in the current system that can be rectified through blockchain.
Yeah, there's one thing that Kieran said about the blue skies laws in general. I mean, coming back to that, where I said, you've got to comply with the federal rules and the state rules. That's not something people generally bother about with respect to the New York Stock Exchange, because they have this thing called preemption, which is publicly trade securities that are traded on the National Securities Exchange, which is NYSE or NASDAQ. They are not subject to the same blue sky rules. And so you've got this sort of, as I say, extra layer of complexity in that private markets have to comply with the with the blue sky rules. And of course, the blue sky rules, they are they're this patchwork of rules, and this is why it makes so much more sense if you have a reliable and I'll say remediable system, and we can get to that in a moment. But you can go, okay, so this person has logged in from Tennessee and they're selling to this person in New York, and so both of those state laws have been triggered, but the smart contracts have been set up so that we know this person in Tennessee has never sold before this class of securities, and we double check that, and so it goes into the pool, gets sold into New York, and we know that what the rules are in New York, because the types of exemption that you can be relying on, there's some exemptions for people who don't trade very much, and then some exemptions for securities that of issuers who comply with the Reg A rules, and then there are some for rules that comply with other disclosure rules. And so if you've got your system set up so that they go, okay, incoming from state X, which one of these things can we go through? Outgoing is there. But you do need to go back to the whole point of smart contracts. Sometimes things can go wrong. And so you need to be very sure that those rules are set up right in the beginning. And then there has to be some kind of fail-safe because the smart contracts aren't smart.
Exactly. One question that I have, Sarah, how frequently do these blue sky laws change with respect to securities transactions?
They go in phases, and again, it depends on states. There are some states who only have where most of their securities laws are in the legislation, and so that will depend on how often does your state legislature meet, that you can things can be changed, and some of them are embedded in regulations which can be changed at the sort of the government bureaucracy level. So it really depends. But what we see is change tends to come in waves. So when Reg A came out, there was a push by a number of folks to say, hey, there should be an exemption for Reg A because any company that is complying with Reg A ongoing reporting requirements, there's enough information about that. And information provision is what we care about. So a number of states are like, oh, yeah, sure. And they all changed at the same time. Intermittent, sporadic, and wave-based.
Got it.
Yeah, things like that always, keep us technologists, up at night saying, oh my God, they're going to change. So we got to keep in track. So
you can also preempt blue sky laws for primary issuances, and then those preemptions disappear on secondary trading. So, you always have to be mindful of that.
So Ben, I mean, you have been with the ATS. I mean, you have seen a lot of the ATS systems out there, and I'm kind of curious. I mean, if people are, let's say, I'm a regular Joe, and I'm simply, selling my shares on an ATS like that. It would be really funny if the ATS came back to me and saw a system said, "Oh, you live in Florida, you can't sell to somebody in Wisconsin. Sorry."
Right.
Do the ATS systems out there, do they do a good job of educating people and kind of explaining how this works?
Well, that's our job, and you do have situations like that. I mean, you'll have situations where issuers are limiting trading or issuance only to certain states. So it's certainly, and as Sarah was saying, it's a complex set of changing rules. that you always need to be aware of, and that's certainly a major consideration if you're opening yourself to trading. But at the same time, you lose the penalty of a lack of liquidity discount. So there's a trade-off there.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. What I'm hearing is that there's compliance that not only needs to come from the platforms and the providers, but also from the documents, right, that are drafted initially, not only in the primary, but in the secondary. There's this added layer that has to be reviewed and verified in order for that primary issuance to trade on the secondary. And all of these things have to happen, and before that's allowed, right? Before it's compliantly allowed. So
right. It's not like you say, oh, we're just going to start trading our securities. There's a lot of planning and strategy that goes into it.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really great point Sarah made about the public and private markets and how they're different and how people don't really understand that yet, right? And they come into this situation and say, oh, I have a real estate token and I'm going to be able to trade it like I do my Apple stock. And then they think it's going to be that way. And in some ways it could be, but in other ways it's not. And that's really important to understand.
Right.
I mean, I can place using my iPhone, I can just place a trade, like, Microsoft, IBM, whatever it is, right? In 5 seconds, get a confirmation just like that. In fact, I don't even know if Microsoft or IBM is on NYSE or NASDAQ. I really don't even know that. Forget that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, the other thing is pricing. Pricing is something that is a completely different animal than what retail investors are used to. Investing in IBM or Apple or Tesla stock, where you can go and you have a pretty good idea at the moment that you're making the trade what it's going to sell for or what you're going to buy for. Within illiquid markets and private secondary trading of unregistered securities, it's a little bit more research that has to go into what you're gonna bid at and what you're gonna sell at. You'll see some history of past. We at Texture use an auction system. You'll see a timed auction system. You'll see what those auction results were in the past. You won't see all of the data that goes into that, though. Whereas on the public markets, you see a lot more kind of visibility into the bids and the asks that are coming in.
That's right. I mean, one of the challenges that we have on the primary side of these markets is the fact that in the initial investors who are like, oh, this is new, this CF or Reg A or whatever. So where do I go to find out what the price is? Can I find it on my phone? And we're like, no, that's not how it works. And especially when one of the challenges in the Reg A world is these offerings tend to be open for quite a while. And unless the issuer has decided we're going to close the primary offering and permit secondary trading, there's always the possibility that if you had secondary trading, you're going to undermine or cannibalize your primary offering. But the primary offering could be open for a year, up to 3 years. And people just sort of don't understand that, okay, now I've got my shares. Where do I get the information? Just like, no, you're gonna have to go to the SEC for information about the issuer, and there's no price for them yet.
Right, and although it's a difficult path, you still have a better situation than you have without the existence of a secondary market. Because in that case, it's up to you. You can find somebody on your own, contact your transfer agent, and affect the change. But at least in the case of a secondary trading market, you have a place that you can go every week or every month or every quarter or whatever the issuer sets as their frequency for the auction, and you potentially have a liquid event that could happen at that time. That adds a lot of value, and also adds a lot of value potentially to a primary issuance if you know that primary issuance ahead of time is going to participate in a secondary market. It can really boost the interest and the price in that primary issuance.
Yeah.
One of the things that caught my attention with this whole vision of private capital markets and how we can make blockchain is only one piece of the component. I get that, but what is the enormous potential here, right? So when I first got into this space, and I come from the public market space where everything is like so fluid and completely hidden from you, right? It's very fluid. So I heard that it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for a private share to exchange to transfer one party to the other. And you have to find your own buyer, maybe on the 19th hole on the golf course, right? You have to find your own. And even after that, it still takes about 2 to 3 weeks to completely settle the entire trade. And I'm going, wow, it's that bad, is it? And I'm thinking, wait a minute. The private markets are almost like 40 to 50% of the world's GDP, and they have absolutely no infrastructure. So that to me was mind-boggling.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're talking about potentially a very, very large market. I mean, just today, there are 2 articles that came out. One city was saying that tokenized security market could reach $4 trillion by 2030. And then another article where this Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, which has $9 trillion under management, and he's become a strong evangelist for tokenization, said, the next generation for markets will be tokenization of securities. And the reason for that is the efficiency that presents for future secondary market.
Yeah. Sarah, you touched on something, and we've kind of been kind of weaving in and out of regulation. With regulation A, you mentioned regulation C, regulation D. What regulations can trade on a secondary market?
All of the it's not the regulations that are trading, because it's the securities that were issued originally under the one of these exemptions. And then, of course, to go back to something I mentioned earlier, every transaction, both the initial transaction where it's issuer to the investor, and then later transactions from investor to other investor, seller to buyer, you're relying on a different exemption for that. But looking at the front end there, as you mentioned, securities that were originally issued under Reg CF or Reg A or Reg D in any of its forms, all of those can be traded under certain circumstances, but there's different rules for all of them. So, of course, this is where, again, the smart contracts come in, because one of the things that you have to take care of is, all right, so initial issuance was Reg CF. That means that those securities are tied up for a year and can only be sold to certain persons under certain circumstances. So you might want to just not let them trade for a year. Different for Reg A. Reg A, free trading immediately. So you could let them start trading as soon as they were issued. Reg D, those are restricted securities. So they could be sold under certain circumstances. The exemption you'd use at first maybe would be 4A7, which is the accredited to accredited transfer. You could provide for that until a holding period, which is 1 year if the securities aren't issued by a reporting company, SEC reporting company, and 6 months if they are. The resale exemption that I mentioned under 4A1 presumably is available after that 6 month or 1 year period. So you've got a holding period. So securities originally issued under any of the regulations can be traded, but you've got to have different rules set up for how they get into the trading pool.
Is there one that might be better, or I don't want to say easier, but relatively smarter for this kind of situation?
Yeah,
Easier.
yeah. 4A7's easy. Reg A securities are able to take advantage of a lot of state law exemptions. So I don't know, Ben, do you have a favorite for the original provenance?
I mean, we're certainly encouraging Reg A, and we have a number of issuers that are looking at open primary issuance with trading immediately. So that as soon as you purchase a security, you can turn around and trade it, or you can trade it a month or two later, and there's still primary issuance going on.
I got to say that's gutsy. I mean, I'm not sure. Looking at at the trading records of some of the companies that did Reg A, I mean, there's a chance the market's just going to hand your hat to you. Like, yeah, you sold at 10. I'm trading at 1.
And there's a lot of time and money that goes into doing a Reg A as well. So, there's which give you more flexibility. Reg A gives you a lot of flexibility, but it also gives you a lot of cost and a lot of compliance that goes with it. You have to, go through a review process with the SEC prior to issuance. So, it really, there's a trade-off there, and it really depends on what you're looking to do as an issuer, how active you want the trading market to be, and potentially what you're offering too.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that another, a really good point in what you're saying is that the option of liquidity on the back end, also with the limitation of the number of investors under a Reg D, could be an issue, depending on how much capital was raised with that Reg D, right? If I'm raising $50 million or $100 million under a Reg D, how much liquidity am I actually giving my investors on the back end, right? So I think that it's really important to know going in and starting with the end in mind, and knowing, how to navigate through all of those steps so that you end up in the best position at the end, where you're not looking back and saying, wow, I really should have done this different. I really should have done this another way, and there's a lot of
there are all kinds of considerations for that as well. Sarah, you mentioned the Reg A, that whole plan being risky. It is if you're if that Reg A is a startup or you're investing in a business. But if that Reg A is real world assets that have established value, it becomes a little bit different, and that's kind of what we're seeing a little bit more, that are taking advantage of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Laura, you just raised a really interesting point when you mentioned the numbers issue, because one of the things that is going to have to be built into any system is some kind of monitoring of number of holders. And this is something that, Ben, I don't know if you've got arrangements with transfer agents, because of course, as we know, if you end up with more than 2,000 shareholders, no more than 500 of whom can be non-accredited, you're going to trigger the registration requirements of the 34 Act. You have to become a fully reporting company. And then you've got these conditional exemptions under Regulation CF and Regulation A. So you always have to know what exemption those securities were issued under and sort of tag them, which is where the blockchain comes in, because you can tag those and track them forever. So that's great. That bit has to be immutable. But you've got this whole counting system where the more trading, I was like, oops, we've now got 2,001 investors. What do we do now?
It's true. Yeah. It's true. It's definitely true.
And how is that being managed?
I mean, we have active relationships with transfer agents and custodians, and a pretty wide network, talking to settling brokers, and it really depends on the particular circumstance. Texture is kind of agnostic in terms of chains and providers, so we work with a range that we can kind of custom fit for each particular client.
Got it. How about even though there's a holding period, certain corporate actions can preempt the hold period?
That's a really it depends kind of thing. I mean, and again, this is going to be it's going to depend on how the ATS or wherever has coded everything, because in certain circumstances that the holding period does not and we're talking here about regulation D primarily, although it could also apply to CF, but the hold period is just a period during which it is presumed that for the first year for a non-reporting company, you don't, if you were to resell, you might look like an investment, you might look like an underwriter. And therefore, I remember I mentioned 4A1, transactions by anybody other than the issuer, dealer, or underwriter. It's like, oops, I bought the securities and then I turned around and sold them, so I look like I'm just distributing them to the public. But that's a presumption that can be rebutted, and it can be rebutted in a number of different ways. And I've written almost whole books on that stuff in the past, but it's a very squirrely legal answer. You don't. It's not a set in stone. You can up to this point, and then after that point, you're always free. So it depends what's going on with the company, and there may be things like acquisitions that will change that whole thing.
Right. And
I
I
feel
think
like
that's where a lot of the flexibility. Apologies. So,
no.
but I think that's where a lot of the smart contracts and being able to track and at least flag things like that, right? I mean, I think that's the advantage in just being able to flag, because there's a lot of things to keep track of. From blue sky laws to corporate actions to other things that are happening, and the behavior of the sellers and the buyers and how much they're selling. Does it look like an insider trade if they sell more than 10% of the outstanding stock, et cetera, et cetera? There's a whole slew of things that happen, right?
I keep having the same conversation over and over, and I have my own perspective and view on it. But I keep hearing, oh, we need more regulation in the space around around tokenized securities, et cetera. And I always kind of come back to, well, we have this really specific infrastructure that already exists that is very comprehensive, and if we stay in those lines, I feel like we can get through this process compliantly, and maybe we don't necessarily need more regulation around what we can get done compliantly today. Do you feel that way, or do you feel like there really does need to be more regulation when it comes to tokenizing, let's say, real estate securities, and then selling them on the secondary market? I mean, I feel like we can get through that pretty compliantly, but I don't know.
I agree with that. I mean, I don't think we need anything more than we've already got. I mean, there are some things that we would like, which is, people do argue that preemption for secondary trading might be somewhere that they'd like, but that wouldn't be more regulation. That would be sort of taking out some of what we've already got. And I think it is possible to, I think it's tokenized, or whatever you call them, they're securities law is there. It's super complex, but it is addressable. You can deal with it. I don't think we need more regs. It might be nice to sort of streamline them and coordinate them a little bit better.
On
Yeah, I
that
agree.
topic, Sarah. Oh, I just wanted to double click on what Sarah just said. On that note, will we ever see a situation where, the blue sky laws will just go away? Everything becomes very standardized throughout.
Nope. Yeah, my friends at NASA, the North American Securities Administrations, nope, they are not going to. They think they are the last line of protection, and I mean they do make some excellent points. I mean, some of this, a lot of this market undermined state regulation. It said, states don't get to review Reg CF, states don't get to review Tier 2 Reg A. Their role in the private markets has been diminished. And they are able to point to numbers of failures of regulation, or of the gatekeeper function, or of the issuers themselves. There is a lot of fraud and stuff out there, and so they would fight against this. I think they see themselves in some ways as the last line of protection for the investors.
Interesting.
But I would agree with Sarah that in terms of future regulation within this known space of securities that we're talking about here, it would just be in terms of streamlining it any way that you can. I mean, obviously we've got a tremendously complex system in place right now. The more we can streamline that and make it easier while keeping protections, as Sarah was saying. I mean, ultimately, that's the most important thing here is protections, having protections in place. But, when they talk about needing more regulation with regard to tokens and tokenization, talking about what is a security and what isn't a security, and that whole discussion that's sitting outside of this space in the crypto space and trading of crypto, that really is sitting outside of a regulated environment. And so that really does need some definition or in some way, either through laws or through whatever. And maybe it eventually morphs into what we're talking about here. But it's easy to talk about a real world asset, Laura, like your real estate investment. That's pretty straightforward as a security, and it's pretty straightforward as a tokenized security. It essentially behaves the same. Tokenization just gives it some efficiency and makes it easier for a secondary market to be possible.
Yeah, I think on that note, right, I think the idea is, well, I have custody of my security token and I want to sell my security token to someone else, and I can just go ahead and do that, like they're seeing in the crypto space, and they're thinking they can do it that way, right? Which we know that they can't do it that way. With that in mind, are you seeing maybe market makers in the secondary? Are you seeing that this could potentially turn into something that could become more, I don't know, prevalent as the volume of tokenized securities starts to pick up?
I think that's what you just hit it on the head. It really has to do with volume. With a by definition an illiquid space where there's very little information out there, public information in terms of data on bids and asks, as well as data about the company itself. It's very difficult to do that. But there is discussion about having market makers within that space, but you need the volume in order to make that work. And you need some kind of stability of that market in order to make that work. Otherwise, there's huge risks.
I think we have already seen one flavor of that in the public cryptocurrency space, all right? I mean, these are the so-called market makers. They just do back and forth transactions, and it kind of gives the illusion that there's a lot of liquidity going on.
So I think, I think we've touched on so much information, really great information. I mean, every single time I have these conversations, I learn more and more and more from everyone. So thank you for that. Is there anything that you think, what barriers do you think are in the way of this moving forward? Can you identify any barriers, perhaps?
Awareness. Like anything that's still in a nascent stage, it's awareness, it's education, and certainly getting to a retail market requires so much on that side. So you really need to have something that's familiar, that becomes a part of that structure, that retail investors have an interest in kind of getting involved in. Like, we're talking to companies about tokenizing music royalties. Now, that's something that could potentially bring in large amounts of retail investors that have no interest in potentially a tokenized secondary market structure, or how that works, or how they fit into that, or what the future is there. But they're just interested in that music, and they'd love to participate in ownership of the royalties for that, or potentially fractionalized artwork that can bring in vast amounts of retail investors. I think getting retail investors is really important to the growth of this space because it gives you volume.
Great. Anyone else have insight, perspective, visions? I mean,
Well,
I also think it's education. You know, I would agree with that for sure.
I would say, and Sarah, I mean, you're more in the compliance and legal space. Maybe you can help with this one. But I think, to Ben's point, there's this awareness, but the specific awareness that I'm thinking about is awareness of the difference between the crypto instruments, the payment instruments versus securities instruments, the differences between, bearer and non-bearer instruments. And, people who generally come from the crypto space have this vision of anything can be peer-to-peer and we don't need protections, but I don't think that's true or even desirable in the security space, right?
Yeah, it's, this is not just like, the farmer's market where you go and buy, a cabbage and it's between me and the farmer and that's it. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I in general, I love the blockchain technology. I find crypto fascinating, but ultimately kind of pointless. I mean, the point I keep making is if I can't go into the pub and buy a beer with it, it's not money. But this is a completely different space, and I think one of the things, to go back to Laura's point, it is important for people to realize that just because something is tokenized or whatever we want to call it, because that these things have gone through numbers of different names, and people use also the NFT term to apply to a whole bunch of things. But whatever it is, if it's a security, however it is packaged and whatever, it is a security, and we're subject to securities laws with respect to who can trade it and who can bring buyers and sellers together.
Yep, such a great point to wrap up on. I just appreciate the insight from all of you. Is there anything else I might have missed that we could talk about or should talk about or touch on that we might have missed?
I don't think we talked. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the point that securities are securities. It doesn't matter if they're fractionalized. It doesn't matter if they are digitized. Whatever you have done to them, they are still securities. You're never going to stop something being a security.
I love that. I think we really need to just drive that home too, and that's really how we win at this, right? Is to play in those boundaries and stay in the lines, and we can move this space forward and not and do it the right way if we just comply with what we're already doing, right? What already exists in the infrastructure.
Absolutely. A pig with a lipstick on it is still a pig, right?
Right.
and not confusing this tokenized security sector with crypto. They're very, very different animals.
Exactly.
They may operate with some of the same technology. That really is the only similarity here, because these are regulated instruments and that are being transferred according to laws and regulations within the US, and they're very legal, they're very real, and now you've got this huge growth in interest in fractionalization of real world assets, things like real estate. Now we're seeing home equity that's being fractionalized and offered. You've got art, you've got music royalties, you've got horses, you've got these are real world assets with known values that are being tokenized and issued and then secondary traded, and that market is getting a lot of interest. You've got a few players now in the US that are able to do it as broker dealers, but you've got a lot of interest from very large institutions that have been looking at this space for some time and are now starting to act. You're seeing partners like Citi and BlackRock come out with statements like that. That's because they're ready to enter it. And you've got, some smaller players within the digital asset broker dealer market, like Texture, who's a startup that will, eventually participate in this huge growth that is coming. So, we're really excited for what the future of this space holds.
And as a technologist, I have to say, the more you business people all think of all these wonderful ideas and, new things and new business models, the more exciting it gets for us on the technology side, because we have to engineer all this stuff, right? So I agree with Sarah. I mean, I think some of the engineering on the cryptocurrency side is absolutely fascinating, no doubt about it, right? But those lessons you take and then you apply it to all these regulated environments, and I think it just, it just makes so much more possible. It's amazing.
Yeah, I
Agreed.
think that one thing that Sarah touched on early on that we might not have really gotten to is the jurisdictional compliance, right? We're hyper focused, right, on everything that's happening here in the U.S. and the SEC, and anyone in the world can jump online and watch this webinar and think, oh, I could just go and buy these securities, and how do I do that, and how is that, can I do it this way where we are, or how come they're doing it that way? And I think that is really important too, because I talk to people all over in different countries that their securities setup is completely different from here, and they don't want to touch anything that has to do with the US because they don't want to deal with the SEC, and they just want to work within their own country, and for these kinds of reasons. And I think that that's going to be something that's important to look at in the future, because we're all going to overlap, right, with this online access, global access.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Jurisdictions start to get blurred, but ultimately within the U.S., if you're dealing with a U.S. company, or if you want to have access to U.S. investors, you're going to have to deal with the system in one way or another. And there are overlaps. You're right. Certainly when you're dealing with foreign investors or foreign companies, but that's what companies like Texture are here to help you with.
Yes, and thank you for that. You're going to make our lives easier. I think everyone here is going to make our lives easier. So thank you so much. Well, that's really all that I have. I appreciate everyone's input. I want to thank you all very much for sharing your knowledge with us, and education is so important, and for you to give that freely in the way that you do, I really, really appreciate it. I want to thank KoreChain for the platform to be able to offer this information. And if you all would like to share how you could be reached, you're welcome to do that now too.
Oh, certainly. For KoreConnects, it's pretty simple. Kiran at KoreConnects.com. Pretty straightforward. And we're also on LinkedIn too.
And I'm Sarah at CrowdCheck.com. No H on the Sarah.
And we are texture.capital, and you can reach me at Descipio at texture.capital.
Perfect. And I'm Laura Pamatian, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you.